A question was asked in the channel comments, understanding when and how to do water changes. So here are my thoughts on the subject. Personally, I do not do water changes, so be sure to watch the whole video to the end to find out what I do. Water, or H2O, which is composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atoms, this amazing element governs our planet. It fuels the climate of the world. Nothing can exist without water. It is fundamental to all life. Water is called the universal solvent as it dissolves most things, which in turn raises the TDS. That's the total dissolved solids. So why do water changes? To reduce pollutants and growth pheromones in the water. Someone coined the phrase, the solution to pollution is dilution, which is one reason to do water changes. The other reason for doing water changes is to keep the pH stable and to stop a pH crash, which will kill your koi. Basically, the more you feed, the more your water becomes acidic, because your filter is using up the hardness in the water, which in turns lower the pH to acidic. By doing water changes, you are topping up the hardness in the water. Unless of course you live in a very soft area, where you would use oyster shells to buffer the water. Stable water conditions are the prime factor in keeping koi. So slow changes are far better than a huge change in water quality and temperature. I always use a 3-pod water purifier with any water going into the pond. Since COVID, the water companies have upped the amount of chemicals that they dump into the tap water to kill off all the bacteria and germs, so beware. But if your filter is working well, then the need for fresh water is drastically reduced. So check the amount of media to the amount of food you are feeding to your koi. Can it cope with how much food you are feeding? Is it correct? If not, adjust the amount of media. You cannot have too much filter media in your pond, but you can have too little to cope with the amount that you are feeding to your koi. Word of warning, it's only worth doing a water change if, and it's a big if, the water is better than the water in your pond. So check the water from the tap before dumping gallons of crap water into your ponds. Please, please, please do not assume the tap water is better than your pond water. Sometimes it can be a whole lot worse. Years ago, a water company spokesperson told me, "We only make tap water fit for humans to drink, not safe for your koi to swim in." I replied, "If it's not safe for my koi to swim in, is it safe for me to drink?" The conversation suddenly ended. I wonder why. If you are a returning viewer, please subscribe to help me grow the channel. A like, a comment, a question will also help with the ratings on YouTube. I have little sympathy for water companies as they only have to catch the water when it rains. How hard can that be? The fact that they've sold off all their reservoirs in the south for building land may have something to do with it. So far, they've only replaced it with 1 reservoir in the south, and even that isn't built yet. They dump raw, untreated sewerage with impunity into our water reservoirs like Lake Windermere, which is a source for human drinking water. Yuck! So to counter all the crap that they dump into our water source, they then dump more chemicals into the tap water system to kill off all the germs and bacteria that they dumped into the water system in the first place. Is it me? They dump raw untreated sewerage into the rivers and seas, polluting them and killing fish and wildlife with impunity. If they're killing fish and wildlife, what are they doing to our health and our bodies with this water? It is a well-known fact that fertility in fish has fallen due to the amount of women on the pill. The fact is, they combine this by just dumping millions of gallons of untreated sewage into the rivers, lakes and seas. So assuming your tap water is better than your pond water is a very dangerous game to play, with the cost being paid by your koi. I test the water out of the tap, and it does vary, so I always use a 3-pod water purifier to clean the water before it enters the pond. These are essential bit of kit. Mine go in pure white and come out 3 months later a coffee colour, full of sediment. So if anyone tells you just spray the water onto the pond straight from the hose, it's okay, ignore them and any other bad advice they may bless you with. We also use a 3-pod purifier with our drinking water and for making tea and coffee, and it makes a big difference. If we make it straight out of the tap, a scum forms on the surface, but none forms from the water from the purifier. I rest my case. Okay, I think I've covered the why we should do water changes. Now let's look at when we should do water changes. You should be monitoring your water parameters for things like ammonia, nitrite and nitrate and pH. I have a simple chart on the computer I fill in with the date and the parameters. This is an essential bit of kit, a koi journal if you like, and you can go back in time to see when the changes started. For argument's sake, when you treated for flukes or cleaned a filter. If you are monitoring your pond water, you should notice any change in hardness or pH, in which case it's time for a water change. I recently watched a video of a person in Japan saying that Japanese breeders use a lot of oyster shells in filtering their pond water. Actually, the water is extremely soft in Japan. They're not putting the oyster shells into the filters to filter the water, but to buffer the hardness up and to prevent a pH crash. As the water passes the oyster shells, the shells are slowly dissolved, raising the pH of the water. The other thing is that stocking rates are extremely high in breeders' ponds, so things can go from a slight problem to a disaster very quickly. I have a couple of videos coming up, one on nitrite and one on koi fry food, so be sure to subscribe. Personally, I do not do water changes. It's a true statement, but very misleading, because it implies I never change any water. I constantly use a slow trickle in and out, but always through a 3-pod purifier. It is surprising how much water a dripping tap will use. 1 gallon an hour is 24 gallons a day. 168 gallons a week. I would suggest you change 15% of your pond water weekly. Make a note of the date and put a reminder on your computer when to change your water purifier cartridges. A great tip, buy a year's supply of cartridges on Black Friday and get a huge discount.